So I was reading last night about the Bible code. Do you know much about that?
Yeah, then certain words have numbers associated with them. Is that it?
So they'll look at the Bible and every X amount of letters, they'll extract a letter in a
Yeah,
kind of in a linear sequence. So let's say every 10 letters, they'll extract a letter.
yeah,
Or and they'll do things like every 10 letters, they'll extract a
yeah,
letter. Then they'll skip 613, which is like the 613
yeah.
commandments. And it was done at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and it
Hmm.
was a physicist, an applied mathematician, and someone else. So at the time they were respectable. It was debunked that it was found that they were intentionally trying to optimize um, certain combinations for the Bible. And then when it was reviewed later by other mathematicians, they found, oh, they could do the same thing with War and Peace. They could start finding all
Wow,
kinds of like
that's cool.
a list of rabbis and the corresponding, birth dates in War and Peace. But what
Yeah,
they did was they I don't fully understand the maths behind it, but what they did originally was they listed all these rabbis and their birth dates and deaths, and the Bible kept revealing like, okay, here's this famous rabbi, and he was born here and died here, and the spaces is something about the combinations. It was too unlikely to occur is what they summarized it as, and they said this is not by chance. That was the official
yeah.
summary, and it was published in mathematics journals, statistics journals, and all kinds of things like that. And but turns out that the rabbis could have the rabbis they listed, which was a lot of rabbis, they had many different possible names. So they actually what they did was they picked the names that would give them the optimal results. As soon as you kind of shifted the name or included a last name, suddenly the bite, like, it was just a complete mess. And you
Mhm.
could do the same, like I said, with War and Peace and any other books. But the point is, I was thinking about that, and I was like, what, I wonder what it kind of makes me think of, like, like you already believe something and then you're finding a rationalization for it. Like, you want to believe in this. So
Yeah,
even though you're doing the research, you want to believe in this. And then it made me think of, I just want to get your thoughts if you think as well that all these things are connected, like UFOs, dyeing your hair red and green. Do you know this guy?
no.
This guy is it something Emoto? Is this Japanese nutritionist? And he did a study apparently, and it was debunked. But initially, it came out and he became famous, just like the guys who did the Bible Code, and they actually published a book. And it was the guy who was responsible for the research as well was on Oprah and talking about all the predictions that were going to happen. Anyway, so similar with this guy, he also became famous. He apparently showed that emotions affect the cells of water. And so when you swear,
Okay.
the water becomes ugly. And when you speak nicely, the water is beautiful. And he painted, like, it looked like whatever he was showing. There's like one side is like a smile, and one side, let's see if I can actually find it. Emoto Water. Uh, Here we go. Yeah. Image is not so great, but it's good enough. You'll get it. So he showed that this is what happens to water depending on what you talk about. I will kill you, heavy metal, and then compare, and that's
That's
and
fun.
this is and that's the result. Okay, so there's that. And
Yeah,
interestingly enough, I've tried ayahuasca, and I've gone to one of those ceremonies, and often they mention this guy, even though his stuff has been debunked ages ago. People bring it up. It's like a fact that your consciousness affects water and everything like that.
hmm,
And so still, there's more coming. And then there's Feynman. He had a conversation with his friend who's an artist. I don't know if you know this story.
it sounds familiar.
Yeah, so the artist is like, he doesn't like science because it takes away the beauty of the everything. And I don't know
Yeah,
if
I
you've ever
remember that
heard
actually.
if you've heard people say they like the fact that there's like a mystery, there's some kind of like beauty about mystery.
Yes,
It's this
yes.
ineffable feeling that you have, which I've felt
Hmm.
before ages ago when I was still kind of like semi unsure about God. And anyway, I connected all these things and I thought, I wonder if this all ties to the same thing that is being mentioned here of the anti-measurement attitude. It's like, and what is the anti-measurement attitude, but on some level, like anti-identity. And I wonder if I could integrate all these things to,
Well,
in
why
some
did you put
respect,
the hair there? Why does that one? It seems like out of
that,
nowhere.
yeah, I think, so I think on the hair thing, there's probably a lot of motivations for it, but I think one motivation could be like, why would you want to be blue or red? Like it's completely, one thing is like a kind of against standards, against norms. And
Yeah.
and that
I
that's
mean,
the
I
that's the way
I
I
mean,
thought
I do
maybe.
that sometimes. I've colored my hair like that sometimes.
Yeah,
I guess it depends on the motivation, really. I
yeah,
mean,
I
as
think
we've
so
talked
as
about
well.
before, there's people who rebel for the sake of rebelling, which might not have any cognitive reason behind it. It's just like some emotional reaction, just to
Yeah.
be different. And that you could say is a bit arbitrary or pointless. But even then, I'm not sure if that would be an anti-measurement attitude. I mean, it could be it's more like I would just consider it something else. I'm not sure what I consider that, but the rest I would agree is like anti-measurement in the sense that
Could make it
against
small.
the, say, making it against explanation, against, I mean, explanation in some way can entail some sort of measurement, like identification of facts, distinguishing from other facts. In that sense, sure, it's like a, not necessarily measurement per se, but a resistance to a determinate reality, a resistance to say there is a fact in the matter. I mean, it's weird to me that finding a fact to somebody would take away the mystery or take away meaning. It's rather strange to me because how do you find meaning if not identifying something? How can you not see the meaning of something unless you identify what it is at the
But
very least?
for someone on let's say to some extent on a primacy of consciousness premise, you want to
Yeah,
retain that. Like to lose that is to lose yourself. And so if you think about it, this is primacy, like this is a desire for primacy of consciousness. Why else would like,
for sure.
I thought about like people bringing that up as well. And you could look it up and the research has already been done on it. Um, it's fine to approach these things in an open-minded way, but there's definitely a sense of, I've got a sense when I've met people who advocate it or speak about it in certain contexts that are already, like you're doing a psychedelic. It's like in a certain context, it's that primacy. You want the primacy of consciousness. You want it to be true. And same with this, like, um, if this doesn't happen, and if you can explain everything and everything is subsumed under some physical law that's got a mathematical form there, and there's like, there's some logical explanation for UFOs, like, oh, okay, it's just an issue with the radar, or I don't know what, I haven't looked into it enough, but that kind of like doesn't give you that, it just pushes on your primacy of consciousness premise. At least with this, you can like somewhat hold it, and like it gives you an extra rationalization for it. It lets you retain that kind of mysterious feeling which you can't define.
Yeah,
That's why I think it makes sense too. If you have some mysterious ineffable feeling about the universe, and this kind of triggers that even more, all these things. I don't know, I agree with you. I'm not too sure about this, but just because it's like the reasoning was, it appears so bizarre and non outside of the norm that, um, I actually think sometimes it can look good, but still, it's like I thought maybe one motivation could be just because it's that bizarre, out of this world kind of look, and you're like, I thought maybe there's a connection, but it's a stretch for the hair.
yeah, it's, I see what you're getting at, but I think it's a different type of issue or a
Okay.
different type of question than it is about epistemology. Exactly. This
Okay.
is more like a epistemological or metaphysical premise. So I think a lot of what can motivate those like UFO things or excessive spirituality or crystals have magic powers. I mean, I think that comes from like a something of primacy of consciousness, thinking that your consciousness has some effective hold over reality itself.
Right.
That there's an absolute, that they have a control, a direct control over consequences in their life,
Right.
as opposed like direct as in your wish is how it shall be. It will be made to be that way by their will alone. And there's varying degrees that somebody might believe that's possible. I mean, the most extreme kind would be that they could make things appear in front of them, but a more subtle kind would be like, I don't want to accept that I can't wish for success and be successful, or I can't just desire to write a good book and therefore it will be good. It's like a refusal of self-responsibility on some level, or rather that they want to be able to be the reverse of that, that it gives them a sense of control over what otherwise might not be controllable.
Right. Given what you said, initially you said it doesn't make sense to you why someone would think an explanation for something would cause the world to lose meaning. But given what you said, doesn't it make way more sense that like you would lose meaning because all your confidence, in a sense, your sense of identity is tied up in this premise.
Right, I agree.
Level.
I meant more that from my perspective, it seems utterly insane. But when we look at it this way, you can understand, even if it's not like, I might understand, like, relate to, like, I see it, but it's totally unrelatable.
Okay.
And if you acknowledge that reality is what it is, it's like, why would anyone want to believe that? But clearly they have something primacy of consciousness, or at least that's the way it can be.
Yeah. I don't think you get to the point where you think objectively to a great extent and then you retrogress into this. I think this is where you might begin. Do you know what I'm saying? And so it's not the same kind of thinking that you're going through right now. Like, why would I, reality is what it is. Why would I ignore that or try and ignore that? Like that's not even there's no thought process like that.
People could regress. I mean, that's definitely happens within like psychotherapy contexts, or like a person like was good, then they regressed because of some issue in their life. Okay, maybe they refused to accept responsibility, and then they regressed.
What about someone who's highly objective, scientific, and is 35 years old? Do you think it's likely who will then delve into mysticism without having any sort of biologically based mental problem?
I would guess not, but it's hard to say.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have any examples.
I've not seen that. That's why I don't know. Yeah.
It might not be obviously mystical, but more subtle, like internally that's an expectation on themselves that if they work hard, they'll be guaranteed success. And it's not obviously mystical, but if you have this belief that your will alone can accomplish something,
right,
then you could have like bad responses to things, or
right,
more dogmatically refuse to look at other evidence that normally you should look at, but by that whatever rationality, you refuse to look at, say, counter evidence to something, or refuse to improve. Like you might actually do a good job, but it's difficult to do good at science if you don't listen to criticism.
Right.
It would manifest differently.
Interestingly enough, I know a lot of people who are successful in business are, or at least I've in the past looked at it as delusionally optimistic and have a delusional sense of how much is in their control, but there's something to it because they do often, I guess in America and in other Western countries where you're allowed to rise up as in, there's less barring your way politically. That seems to be a thing. I know that what's his name? Andrew Kahn, I think, is he Carnegie, the famous banker or
Carnegie.
industrialist? I think at the time he was living, the average age expectancy was, I think, 38 or 40, and he said he was going to live to 100. And yeah, like they all. And I have a friend who's in business, and if you would have asked me years ago, I would have said he's delusionally optimistic and thinks he has a massive amount of control over his life, which he does have some control, but not the amount he thinks. But it, I think if you come to a viewpoint, it's very easy to then come to a viewpoint of like, you're saying you're realistic, but then you wouldn't take as much responsibility as this person does. And so it has some impact, because why is it that all these, a lot of these successful businessmen are delusionally optimistic? At least, they could be looked at as delusionally optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
You
a
just
thing
want
too.
to be careful of psychologizing, because we can't always, well, of course we can't know what's going on in their consciousness, but we can see that if you have a primacy of consciousness viewpoint, that it could lead to these things in a fairly straightforward way.
Right.
And of course you would need to investigate further with that person. Are they just really ignorant of science? Or is it that they're aware of the good science, but they deny it? I mean, that's a big difference, of course.
Right.
I mean, it could be that you discover something that's interesting, but generally not. I mean, I would wonder if it's true that the guy observed the snowflakes changing, but what is it that made the conditions that somebody changed their emotion? Does that actually say something about the environment the snowflakes were in? I mean, maybe it's just the right observation, wrong explanation. For example,
No, I don't think so. I haven't looked at this study, but I'll tell you why. Because when they debunked this study of the Bible code, they found that out of all the combinations of words and names they could have chosen, and there were a lot of different combinations, they only chose those that were optimal for the finding these codes in the Bible. And so these researchers were reputable at the time. This was published in a mathematics and statistical journal. And even they later, after this was debunked, claimed that they didn't intentionally pick, the right combinations, right?
Yeah.
But what are the chances that's what they said, but what are the chances, maybe on some level they evaded that fact, like they actually convinced themselves that that's what they did. But looking at it from here, let's see if I can actually find what it said about when it was debunked. Okay, the miracle, if there is one, is that Witztum and his colleagues were moved to choose precisely those versions of the names on which the Torah scores best, so the Bible. And then Whitsom, Rips, and Rosenberg insist they weren't like the masters of the incubator funds, displaying to the public only the experiments that gave the best possible results. Their precise list of names was chosen in advance, they say, before running any tests. And even if that may well be true, and that may well be true, this guy says, but even if it is the case, it casts the miraculous success of the Bible code in different light. The miracle keeps on going, but the miracle, if there is one, is that Witztum and his colleagues were moved to choose precisely those versions of names. Okay, I read that before, but you get the point, right? Like, apparently just without even thinking about it, out of all the combinations of names they chose those that the Bible is optimized for.
Mhm.
And so I think it's probably similar with this guy, right? Like you want a certain result, and you can doctor it in a way that you get that
Yeah,
result, but then you can evade it yourself, right? You can tell yourself that
yeah, yeah. You can deny plausible explanations. Like
right.
any scientist would be able to think about all the plausible explanations and mention them in a paper and say, like, well, this one is less credible. This is plausible. I mean, it seems like just throwing out many explanations except the one he wants to be true,
Mm.
which is bad science anyway. I mean, maybe he thought about it, or maybe he's evading it. It's hard to say.
From what I understood, it's even more malicious than that. It's not even, you're not mentioning
Yeah,
the evidence. You're literally, in this case, in the
yeah. In
Bible, it was
the Bible code, yeah, but in the snowflake guy,
right. I don't know about the snowflake guy. I need to look it up.
yeah, he might.
But
He's more like a probably just not bothering to think of alternative explanations. It's like a
but
cognitive bias.
it's like uh in the history of philosophy, when they try and develop proofs for God, like who
Yes.
does Aquinas, and who else? There's a few others. I think Spinoza, and
Yeah.
there's others. But the point is, they already believed in God, right? They had a feeling, and they just wanted to rationalize and justify that feeling. And so I think it's similar in these cases. So you're creating something. It's not even, you're being dishonest in the way you approach the experiment. And I think they're probably even being dishonest with themselves. Like they want to believe this.
Yeah, I think that's often the case. I mean, it is possible to create a deductive argument after you've induced something to be true as a way to reaffirm your belief, and that could make sense.
Right.
But if you start out just deducing, that would be like almost primacy of consciousness. You say, this is the fact because I say so, and you deduce everything from that. Then, of course, everything you say will follow from that. If everything is rationalized just from that one deduction.
Right. And there's one more thing I'll
The
paste.
only way to get beyond that is primacy of existence, where you focus on a fact and recognizing that your sheer thought of it is enough to make it true. You can't simply deduce something.
Sorry,
You have
could
to
you
actually,
repeat that? Sorry, repeat that thing about
basically,
primacy.
that primacy of existence would make you emphasize that whatever thoughts you have,
Yeah.
you can't simply deduce from there, because you need to be sure that you came up with an appropriate concept in the
Right.
first place.
Right. Yeah.
That prevents the bias. It prevents bad thinking.
So one perspective, it's true. I remember reading this. One perspective is it's true in reason, therefore I accept it. The other is I accept it, therefore it's true.
Yeah. I think if I get what you're saying.
Sorry.
Can you rephrase that though?
Yeah.
That
So
seems awkward.
okay. A primacy of existence attitude is I accept this idea in reason. Like it makes sense. It's reasonable. Therefore I believe it's true. That's primacy of existence attitude. A primacy of consciousness attitude is I accept this idea as true. I accept this idea as true. Therefore, I accept this idea. Therefore, it's true. It's just you accept the idea. Therefore, it's true. Whereas the other one is I accept this idea makes sense in reason. Therefore, I accept it.
I would almost phrase it the primacy of consciousness sounds right. But the other one I would say, I accept that what is, and what is not is not. That would be more primacy of existence, I think.
Okay. There was a quote, I might find it for you later, but it captured both attitudes succinctly and nicely.
Yeah.
And this is from the Art of Thinking lecture. We were talking about essences a while ago, and he was looking for essences in statements and quotes. And so, in this one, for example, he said, religion, if someone says religion makes life exciting, what is the essence, the essential behind that attitude if someone says that. Oh, there could be a lot of motivations, but let's say most of the time he said reason is incompatible with that values. I've never heard anyone say this, by the way. but it, like you could substitute in mystery, like things you cannot identify, like UFOs.
Yeah.
And do you think I could tie it to this?
Almost in a chain way, like a passion, like for the emotional, the sheer unknown, the sheer excitement of it is itself where value comes from, in that Nietzschean sense, that the Dionysian kind of attitude, which is not pro reason for sure. It is very emotion based.
Okay. Anyway, I gotta think about those examples a bit more.
Yeah. Oh, just to mention about essentials, I think it is possible to, well, I think you first need to distinguish, say, essentials of a concept, which is a different idea than when you say, what's the essential of this statement? When we say essential of a statement, it's usually would sound like it means what is the point of this statement? What wider abstraction does it capture? Things like that, I think it usually means. Or what is it supposed to identify in your mind in particular? Like you say, mystery is the meaning of life, or gives life meaning. And you have to identify within that, what is it that is more essential to that? What is more fundamental? What underlies that statement? Like or finding the philosophical premise. Yes, identifying their premise. I think that's usually what an essential is for statements, for particular statements. You're just saying, what is the underlying premise?
Yeah, that's how I've understood it. Like what is the wider abstraction that this is an instance of?
Yeah, but just be careful not to equivocate that sense of essential with the essential of a concept. I don't think they're exactly used in the same way. I mean, it's the same definition, same meaning, same concept. It's just a different context of usage. Like it's not applied to the same thing.
But it's not necessarily a characteristic of a paragraph or a statement, but it's more like it is what wider philosophical abstraction or premise is this an instance of? Do you think that's accurate for me to say?
Yeah, what instance of what philosophical premise is that an instance of?
Yep.
I think that would be a good way to think of it.
Mm-hmm.
And what explains a lot about it. It's just recognizing that it's different usage than applied to concepts.
It's difficult to actually do it well because it's partially psychological as well. Like in those examples I gave, it involves motivations, and people can have many different alternative motivations for different things. And so you've got to be at a point where you can say there's no other conceivable alternative motivation. Like in the example of the hair, I do agree with you that there can be, like someone could just think it looks cool. I don't know if you could get underneath that, but there may, I could see that maybe there's some other, I don't know, they like a character that it's like an anime character and it's got like red hair or something. So, maybe there's other motivations there, but yeah.
But at least you can identify within yourself what these things would entail. Like if you accepted primacy of consciousness, what would happen to you? Like you probably would know.
What? I do know what would happen to me.
Well, I mean, like, I didn't mean it that way. I meant.
I would talk to you about UFOs and try and hint at that aliens exist.
Yeah. I don't know what I was trying to say, but yeah, you're right though.
But anyway, I was just trying to do that as an exercise because I really like being. I
Yeah,
think it's cool if you can think like that, right? If you can conceptualize and identify what abstractions, random things like before they were all random to me, and I was just thinking about it last night. Like,
yeah,
hang on a second, maybe all these things are related.
yeah. You definitely could find underlying premises of statements, which you could phrase as an essential because it's something that explains something that's most important to this statement. And we could say what is most important to a statement.
Right.
In particular, it could be what premise is it an instance of?
Right. Yeah. Um, yeah. Like I said, though, the only difficult thing is the identifying the motivations because
Yes, it
there are
is.
many, and you've got to be at a point where you're confident that there is no other possible motivation other than this underlying premise, which takes a certain amount of perceptiveness, which I don't have yet.
Yeah, for sure. That takes a lot of time. Just observing people, like probably can't even do that till like you're in your 40s or something. I feel like when you really just see enough people. Well,
I
it's
don't.
probably way exaggerated,
Yeah, I don't
but
think
still
it's
it
just
takes a lot
that.
of experience.
I get what you're saying, experience, but then probably reading very widely as well, like literature, not just nonfiction.
Yes, I think so. It gives you insight into
Dostoevsky.
the possibilities of what people think, even the things you never thought of that seem almost totally insane, but
Right.
it's totally reasonable, totally possible. I mean, not reasonable.
Right. Oh, like the underground man, 2 + 2 = 5, and him getting angry.
Yeah,
That's similar, right? Like to what, all the examples we just gave.
yeah. Like, why would somebody get mad about that? That just
Well,
sounds
I
weird.
I don't know either,
But
but there you go. Like he's
yes,
angry and he's like shaking his fist at 2 + 2 = 4.
yes.
Okay, cool. Let's get on to some Aristotle. I'm trying to think more in those terms. That's why I brought it up. So okay, let's see where I want to go with this. What is it that's subjective about Aristotle's ethics? Like I saw that I haven't read everything, but from what I did understand, it seemed like that was, it seemed reasoned to me. I don't quite get what's subjective about it.
Who said it was?
Um, I think I remember listening. Sorry, I'm getting some tea. I think I remember listening to a Yaron Brook interview when he said that, or maybe it wasn't Yaron Brook. It was someone else. I can't remember, but someone said that, like for Aristotle, he's not an intrinsicist in his ethics. He's a subjectivist, and his goal is to maximize life for man, but it's subjectivist. I can't remember more than that, but I just remember that someone said it was subjective, and I was
I
like,
mean, that
in what sense?
seems weird.
Okay,
I
cool.
don't get that either,
So
but
deal with me on
it
that.
would
All
be in the
right.
same sense that somebody might say Ayn Rand is just about do what you want regardless of what others think. Obviously that's not what it is, but
Yeah,
that
it's
would
not.
sound subjective. But he really was specific that it's relational to the entity, that ethics is not universal, like exists out there. There isn't the moral truth as much as ethics is applied thinking to the particular nature of humans. It's an art in the sense that it's applied as relative to people.
Right.
That you can't have an ethics for fish, and it would make no sense. There's ethics for people,
Okay.
like, or at least if there's a proper action to man, it can only be relative to his nature as man. And Aristotle's reasoning is because it's an applied science or applied philosophy, it can't be universalized to every single instance of man. That it must be relative to each individual or relative to man by his nature and his standards,
Okay.
which is pretty much what Rand says. That ethics is relative to the nature of man, man qua man, as she says.
All right. So yeah, so you're kind of with me on that. It doesn't seem
Yeah.
subjectivist.
It's more like Rand's take.
Yeah.
I mean, you could interpret it other ways, but my interpretation is like Rand, and it does sound like that in many translations.
So what I got is I do notice this keeps coming up. Like everything he's looking at, like he'll consider the physical world, and then he'll start dividing it up like into living, non-living, and then there's bodies, and then there's characteristics and attributes, and then he looks at what are the different categories and attributes like quality, quantity, relationship. He starts to, so basically he's like in the philosophy who needs a story of this astronaut that goes to space, and there are three people approaching him. So if it was Aristotle, he's like, he would go up to them and dissect all of them. And he's just like, what is this world? He'll just start dissecting everything. That's what he does, right? He just, what's in front of me, I'm going to dissect it. That's his approach, both conceptually and physically.
I think so. That sounds appropriate. And he wrote a book, Parts of Animals, where he really does literally distinguish things, breaks it apart. He gets most of that from his biological thinking, I think.
Right. And whereas others are like, they're already asking like, how do I know this is real, and all kinds of questions like that before they get into dissecting everything. He's just taking it as like self-evidently given. Yeah,
that you've got to start with the observations, the distinctions your mind is making, or whatever way you may conceive it, rather than like Heraclitus talking like aphorisms, like you can't step in the same river twice. I mean, that's not really dividing things apart. It's almost like a philosophical assertion.
Right.
It's like trying to disprove or prove that rather than observing what the world is.
Right. Okay. So they almost begin with some conceptual idea that leads to absurdity, and they take that as the truth. Whereas he's like, okay, so you can't ever go into the same river, or Zeno says you can't ever you can't ever cross the street because every time you go halfway, you keep halving it. You never get to the end.
Yeah.
And they almost begin with that, whereas he's like, oh, well, clearly you can. There's something wrong with the argument, rather than he's just busy dissecting the actual physical world, whereas other people get caught up in the concepts. Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of the time Aristotle figures out like they're half right and half wrong. It's like this person's half right. They got this right, but this part's wrong. This other person got this right, but they got this wrong. Then that's usually a lot of what other works are like. Like the Anima, which I read, had a lot of that. Like this person's partially right, but they're wrong in this. He tries to integrate the two, like see what's wrong with both, see what's right in both, and tries to find the integrated solution.
Isn't that like Rand, where you have a false alternative, and then it's because of a misconceptualization, and so he's identifying what have they misconceptualized, and let me reconceptualize it.
Yes. Polemically, I don't think she's like that, but I think the essence of the way she does philosophy, I would say yes. Polemically, I wouldn't say exactly.
What does that mean?
The way she argues, like the way she makes a point. She's very fiery, I guess you could say, in a way that can sometimes for some readers, well, I just mean to say that she's not as subtle when she's arguing a point. You're like in the Q&A, read the Q&A of Ito, you could see she's making very subtle, careful distinctions.
Right.
Distinct from the way she argues about politics.
Okay. I never actually got that much into the politics, even from the beginning. So I haven't read.
Well, that's probably why you don't notice it as much.
Yeah.
That's probably all it is.
Okay. Let's see. Have you found the distinctions he made helpful? Like apparently, let's see if I extract and I'll bold the relevant part from here. Where is it? Like these ones: quantity, quality, place or position. Like when thinking about anything, he made a list. I read that he made a complete enumeration of the attributes that physical.
Yeah, I've been reading about that. That's what I was reading today. Categories.
The philosopher's inventory of categories. Is it helpful?
I think so. And I use it like almost naturally anyway, just
Oh.
quality, quantity, place, time.
Who, what,
Um,
when, where, when. I remember you telling me about that. The journalism, the
well,
four
Aristotle,
question.
those are the attributes he is talking about. And more like the most basic things you could say about any object. So yeah, quantity, quality, place, time,
Right.
size, I think,
I think that's
things like
quantity.
that.
It says
Yeah, you're
here.
right. That's quantity. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. I didn't memorize them yet, but yeah, it's just a bunch of those.
And then what about, so he considers that there's a universe of objects, but it's larger than the actual physical world. At least this is what this guy says, that there's the world of bodies, which includes, wait, let me see if he said that bodies are bigger than the physical. There's more bodies in the physical world. Yeah, so there's things that have existed in the past or will exist in the future, and he considers that the universe of objects. And then I didn't quite get what this author was, the one who summarized him, was saying, that the line that divides bodies from everything else is the great divide. So isn't this just concept? Because then he starts talking about, here are some possible kinds of bodies: mathematical objects, imaginary or fictitious characters, spirits of all sorts, including ghosts and angels, gods of God, when divine beings are thought of not as being not having bodies. Anyway, isn't this the division that Aristotle was making just between the intellect and the physical world?
I would guess. I'm not positive. It sounds like Rand when she talks about existence, which could be math, like concepts that don't have no
Right.
physical realness to it. They exist as ideas within
Right.
your mind or some attribute of thinking or something to that effect.
Mhm.
Which, I mean, there's more existence than objects, like concrete
Entities.
objects in the world.
Right.
I mean, there's almost infinite of those.
Right.
And I don't think Aristotle usually tried to reify those things as real, concrete, tangible things.
Right.
I think he recognized that you distinguish between primary substance and secondary. Primary substance is usually like just individual concrete things. Like you, Jonathan, are a specific primary substance. There's only one of you and you're physical.
Got it.
But secondary substance could be things like the concept man, like you are a type of human, which, I mean, human itself doesn't exist literally, like Plato would say. It's not like there's a human concept that exists independent of everything and has its own reality. It's only a substance in the sense that it's about something that is a substance.
I read that
is
differently, by the way. I interpreted differently from what you're saying.
What are you interpreting?
That there were I'm trying to remember what the wording was he used, but there's like primary objects, or there's like entities, and then there's like secondary entities, and the entities are like you pointed out, like a rock, a table, a man that's standing in front of you, whereas the secondary are just composites of those primaries. So like a government. And then, but I don't know where what you're mentioning now is like, I thought there was a different concept for that, and it wasn't the secondary entity. You know what I'm saying? Like I thought the concepts were just another division that he made, and not that it wasn't primary and then secondary entity. It was some other thing. Not so like what you're describing as a secondary entity, I thought was some other thing. Right now, what you were describing as secondary entity.
It's possible. I just started reading that chapter, but that is the gist I got even from other things I've read, that a substance is more particular, a primary substance and secondaries. Really just something said of it, said of substances or parts of substances, but don't exist on their own.
Right. Like
Just
even
things that don't exist on their own in a way.
like an attribute.
Yeah, I mean, you can't have a color white separate from any object.
Right.
It's only white objects.
That's
There's
why.
no just white that exists separate. So, and that, I think that's another way to interpret it, that
Yeah.
it can exist on its own, separate and individual.
Okay. I'm gonna skip around based on what we're speaking about. Okay, I want to ask you actually about, you're reading the Organon right now,
Yes.
and that's his book on logic
And science.
and science. Have you found, I've read some logic textbooks in the past, but I've never found that it's not like I've then applied it. It's like, for example, so even Aristotle, I read later in the summary, he gives examples. I skimmed it very quickly because I'd have to think about it a lot. But, he talks about contrary, subcontrary, contrapositive,
Yeah.
and other instances of like specific patterns in logic that you get in statements or arguments. But have you found like, is it something you integrate into your thinking and it becomes automated, and like, or what? Because I've struggled to actually apply it in any significant way in both my own thought and just in reading an article, for example. But would you say it's something that is it something that you almost like a virtue and you have to make it a second nature, to take Aristotle's terms?
I think so. I mean, I don't like learning logic in terms of symbols. It's always easier for me with words or like sentences and things like that to like write out these relationships rather than letters or mathematical style of doing it. But when I read it in a way I understand, then it's not easy or it's not that hard to interpret it. But it does get automated the more you need to reason about something and see why someone saying something in fact follows. Like I can know that Aristotle gives value. So my not understanding it at one point encourages me to find the reasoning in it, to find the logic in it, what entails what. Because I don't think Aristotle would be valuable unless other people saw the reason in it. So my not seeing it would kind of encourage me to find it, to find the reasoning, even if it doesn't make sense, but just to know that there is some kind of reasoning, and that can help me practice.
Do you, at the moment, if you read something, are you able to like, do you mentally pass certain things as like, oh, here's the subcontrary, here's the contrapositive, or is what he's talking, is the thing he is talking about something that you literally have to sit down on paper and like constantly analyze in a very slow, deliberate way?
If I never saw that usage before, yes, I'm not used to those words, so I would need to go a bit slow just to integrate the usage of that concept to make it quicker and easier. Not that the idea was hard, but that I need to make it automatic to how I think about this concept. I need to use it in a quick way or figure out the quick way, which I did in this recent reading I was doing with Aristotle. Like at first it was hard, but then I integrated the concept and I viewed it in a different way. Then it got easier the more I thought about it. And then this other reasoning about other topics became easier as a result.
What did you do? What did you integrate?
The word was predicated, which I know what it means, but it's very awkward to me, the usage. And he kept using it over and over. Like, I didn't know how to think of it as partly the translation's fault. But doing that, I thought of it in a different way. Like, just say it's like what you say of something, or it's what you talk about of something. Like if you're talking about something, it's the things you say of it. Like you could talk about a horse, and you could say about it that has 4 legs. You could say that having 4 legs is predicated on horse. In a way, it's like a genus, but it's not. And that's how I
Okay.
started to think of it. And I just practiced with that. Then it got easier. And then
Right.
it's just like you read the word and it's kind of automatic. The more you do it, it almost becomes automatic. And then you don't even need to think about it anymore.
All right. I'm gonna persist and push through. Nietzsche is more like there's more psychology, right? Then it's more like
Yeah.
If I was reading it, it would be something that I could maybe draw more like I could make more connections to my day to day than I could with some of
Yeah.
Aristotle's more abstract. Yeah. Okay.
And you don't need to read as much at once. Like at most, in like Beyond Good and Evil, you read like 2 pages for a passage. The longest passage he has, I think, is 6 pages. But most are like 1 page or 2 pages. And that makes them easier to read. Or if you want to do it in chunks, Aristotle has bigger sections that you can't chunk as much.